The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Nick Zulovich, part of the team at Cherokee Media Group and the senior editor at Subprime Auto Finance News. In today's webinar, a new auction perspective. It's all about the money, not about the cars. We're going to learn more from Maj Sabores, Director of Wholesale Business Development at vAuto. But before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. Please make sure you've dialed in using the phone number provided in your communication email, or you're able to listen via your PC speakers. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll make the recording available to you online as soon as possible after our session today. You will be in listen-only mode for this webinar, but we will reserve some time after the presentation for a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time through the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And if we aren't able to get to your question today, don't worry, because we'll forward it on to the team at vAuto so they can respond back to you directly via email. And lastly, if you have any difficulty during the webinar, please click on the hand icon to alert a member of our team. So with years of experience, let's get right to Maj for our webinar. Sir, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Just a little quick background on myself before we get into the topic to kind of help you frame up why I'm able to help discuss this specific topic with you guys. I have spent about 3 years working with Mannheim Auctions. When I specifically was prior to my job with vAuto, purely focused on the wholesale market in the United States, and specifically trying to understand the overall landscape to be able to evaluate whether we had an opportunity to find alternative channels to dispose of all these vehicles that are coming back into the market. What I mean by that is, as we know, the vehicles coming back off lease were anticipated a couple of years ago, so we're trying to figure out if there's an opportunity for us to find another market for these vehicles outside of the United States. So I spent some time understanding the US market and how it works, and then directed my attention to the rest of the world. And I spent a lot of time evaluating markets in Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, and actually was able to successfully build supply chain routes to those nations and be able to export some vehicles out there as well. So that was really, really interesting time and really gave me an opportunity to understand the wholesale market and how auctions operate. Prior to that, I worked with Auto Trader, where I spend a lot of time trying to understand consumer behavior, really understanding what drives a consumer to purchase a vehicle, and when they do decide to purchase a vehicle, what is the path that they go on to get to a dealership, and basically the process and everything in between. So it also gave me an opportunity to understand consumer behavior, consumer process, and what are they thinking about and how they interact with vehicles, used vehicles specifically. And then, of course, I spent some time on the dealer side trying to understand how the dealers interact and try to close the deal from their perspective. I also spent some time prior to my automotive career, working with mutual fund manager. Spent about 5.5 years really understanding portfolio management, really understanding the financial market and investments, and trying to understand how to maximize return on our investments from the stock market and from the mutual fund business as well. So why am I sharing this with you? I'm sharing this with you is because what we're going to talk about today and how to approach the new wholesale market today is very relevant to what I just shared with you. And it's really relevant in regards to understanding what we are today, how we're doing, and also understanding how things are changing and how they're evolving in our market as technology and as all these vehicles are coming back off lease. So if we look at our overall auction process as it is, and we really look at what it is as a dealer, what are the process that we go through to be able to purchase a vehicle, and for the most part, we can detail it into 5 steps. And really, some of us maybe take a couple steps less, maybe a couple steps more, but overall, it's pretty much the same process that we all go through. We all end up at the same place, and really, it's something that most everybody that goes to an auction has to go through and think about it. And reality is that we're always looking for which cars to go get. We're trying to find those vehicles, trying to define what those vehicles are, and what do they mean to us, and how we're going to go about them. And then when we decide to look at those vehicles, we'll look at the condition report, we'll look at the pictures, we'll look at the vehicle history report. We potentially go book that car out to try to figure out how much that car is worth. Maybe we're looking at the open market as well and seeing how many vehicles are available for sale in that market, comparable to help us try to triangulate what we think we should pay for that vehicle in the wholesale market. And then basically, based on those first two steps, we come up with a target list based on what we think we'd like to go get, and then basically what we've evaluated is worth the money, or if it's worth making the payment. Then, of course, we go to the auction, and then we try to, and I say we try to buy those vehicles, because for the most part, what we have on our target list are not the vehicles that we usually end up with. Multiple reasons, and that's where somebody overbid for us. Somebody else was bidding for this vehicle. They paid a little bit more extra than we were going to pay for, or we just weren't able to win that vehicle for multiple reasons. And then what I mean by retail reality is that when we bring that vehicle back to our dealership or to our lot, sometimes we don't even think about what we thought the vehicle was is not in reality what the vehicle turned out to be. It could basically costing us a little bit too much money from a reconditioning perspective, something we missed, or we missed a specific activity about the vehicle. Or the reality comes back, we bought this vehicle, and then we end up sitting on that vehicle and waiting for that vehicle because it's not necessarily what we thought. But in reality, what I'm going to try to do is we're going to go through that list in a little bit more detail. So if we think of step one, the hunt, and what we go through as we're looking for these vehicles, for the most part, we're creatures of habit, and we try to do the same process over and over again. We try to base our looking for the vehicles based on what we sold, or what we think we need for our specific lot or our specific market. And then when we decide that, we usually go to the same auctions over and over again, or for the most part, maybe two auctions within our geographical area. We don't really look around beyond a certain mileage or destination. Then we do it manually. We potentially export the run list to Excel, and we try to sort that list based on what we think is important, based on year, make, model, average, mileage. However, we decide to really focus in on that list to try to come up with some sort of a manageable list of vehicles that we want to go and investigate further. Because we know that for the most auctions, on average, they're going to have 1,700 vehicles. So we're not going to look at every single vehicle. We're just going to say, hey, I need to look at 50 vehicles today. So we try to narrow down the list to make it as manageable as possible. Then the next step is we do the evaluation, right? We look at pictures. We go through every single picture that's available. We try to find truly what's wrong with the vehicle, if there's anything we can catch visually. We go through reading the condition report, and hoping that for the most part that those auctions do have a condition report, and also hoping that condition report is an accurate depiction of what the physical aspect of that vehicle. Then we try to read if there's any seller notes, and again, any announcements on that vehicle. Is there anything that potentially could give us an indication whether this vehicle's worth our next step or not? Like I mentioned earlier, we run a vehicle history report to look at the vehicle. Where was it? Where did it come from? Who owned it? Was it in a car accident previously? Something happened to it? Did airbag deploy? Whatever, is there a recall on it? Anything that we can give us, again, an idea to vet out the physical aspect of the vehicle. And the last piece of it is we book it. We try to look at current values that are in the market. Try to figure out, is this the right value? How much can I really afford? How much this vehicle should go for in a comparable market? Then we come up with a target list, right? We think these are the 20 cars that I really want to go get, and these are the best cars that I need for my lot this week, because I sold 20, I need to go get 20. And then we basically go to take that list and go to the auction. Maybe we make bid notes. Maybe we could say, this is a really good car. Maybe I can go a little bit higher than the book value that I came up with. Maybe say I have a customer that's waiting for this vehicle or something like that to kind of help us as we go through and trying to bid on these vehicles. And then, of course, hopefully we're running back and forth between the lanes. We're trying to understand if you're missing a run, when is it? Or if it's an out of order run, make sure that we're capturing it. Or if we're online, to make sure we're logged in to the right auction at the right time, again, to be able to capture that vehicle when it comes through. When reality is when we're bidding on these vehicles, we're bidding on these vehicles as best as we can based on what we think is value, but we're also seeing that there's other demand for that vehicle, and there's somebody else in the lane or somebody else online that is willing to go a little bit extra, or a lot extra than we ever thought before. And we're sitting here shaking our heads saying, how could that person pay this much for this vehicle? And we end up not winning that car. So the 20 vehicles that we wanted are on target list, or the 30 vehicles we ended up on our target list, we're lucky to get maybe one or two or three. And then we become reactive. And what I mean by that is that we know we need 20 cars to come back from auction this week because you have empty spots on your lot and you need to fill them. So you start reverting back to maybe plan B or plan C if you have one. And then you start basically trying to bid on every single car that you think you need. But not only that, but you start bidding on cars that you just lucky to get, and saying, I need cars, and I'm going to start buying any car that I can afford at this point in time, because the ones I wanted are not there anymore. I can't go back empty-handed. So we're just being very reactive. And then what happens is that when we become reactive, we are potentially overbidding for a vehicle because we get emotional about it. We get a little upset that I'm sitting here, did all this work and all this energy, and I really want to get this vehicle. So we end up maybe paying a couple $100 more than we anticipated for this vehicle. Or like I mentioned again earlier, we bring this car back to our lots and we take a look at it, and we realize that I didn't vet out this vehicle because this is on plan B or plan C. And in reality, it needs a lot more work than I ever anticipated. Or we actually buy the wrong car altogether because we're not paying attention. We potentially are bidding on a vehicle that's moved off the block already, but the bidding is still going on because there's activity on the vehicle. And the car that we think we're bidding on that is sitting on the block now is not what actual reality is. And the car that we are bidding on is already moved on. So we end up buying the wrong car. I know I myself have done that before. And it's just so fast and so quick that you miss it sometimes. The other reality of it is that being part of the company I work for and being part of Cox Automotive is that we do get to talk to a lot of dealers, and we get to analyze some of their inventory. And we've realized that for the most part, if you look at your aged inventory outside on your lot today, and you look at where the source of those vehicles are or were, for 70% of overaged inventory was acquired at auction somewhere. Unfortunately, because they fit into that scenario, whether we overpaid for it and we basically are pricing it way over the market, we got something in the wrong car that nobody really wants in our market, so we just sit there and unfortunately we have to sit there and try to get rid of that vehicle as best as we can. So if we could summarize sort of what are some of the traditional misses from the process that I mentioned, is as number one is buying the wrong car altogether. Maybe the number two problem is that we're actually buying the same car over and over again because we have a tendency of doing the same thing over. We like this specific kind of car, and we always go up there and gravitate towards it because it's just internally we think that this is the car that is going to make us money. We're focused purely on the vehicle itself. We're not really focused on the profit. We're not really focused, is this the right car that's going to make me a return on my investment? Is this the right car that I need to buy, that my consumers are looking for in my market, or what's hot in my market? And then, of course, the worst problem is that we get nervous, we get anxious, and we just make mistakes. And mistakes create problems that we can't really, that cost us money in the long run. Again, based on the company I work for, we do a lot of analysis as well. And we've discovered that for the most part, an aged vehicle that is sitting on our lot for over 30 days that was purchased at auction is ending up costing us about $28, between $28 and $32 in what we're calling is a holding cost. And holding costs could be multiple things applied into it. Tied up capital in a vehicle that's not making a return on our investment is fast enough. Holding costs, the fact that this vehicle is taking a spot on our lot that instead of having a vehicle that's going to turn faster, is going to sell faster and make us money faster. Its holding costs could include via costs that you are basically incenting your salesperson to go out there and sell this vehicle faster, and you're going to pay them a couple $100 more because that vehicle has been sitting on your lot for a lot longer, and you just need to get rid of it. And multiple different things. You got to detail the car every so often. You got to fill it with gas. You got to move it around. Multiple things that come into holding costs, which really end up resulting in money, a lot more. The other aspect that's really impacting us is that the market is changing every single day, as I mentioned a little bit. And the conditions in the market and the demand in the market is forcing us to change how we do things. We all hear about it, and hopefully you guys are hearing about it. You read about it in all the newspapers and articles, and economists are predicting is that we're getting an increase of off-lease vehicles coming back into the market. We're getting a lot of vehicles that were leased back in a couple of years ago that are coming back in the market today. That lease originations are expiring and they're coming back. We also know that the originating dealers that initiated the lease cannot consume all those used vehicles coming back, so those vehicles are going to come back into the wholesale market. I believe the prediction for this year is about 3.6 million vehicles coming back into the market, going up to close to 4 million next year. So there's tons of vehicles coming back in the market. But what's wrong with it? What's not wrong? The challenge with these vehicles is that they're a lot younger vehicles with lower mileage. So they're vehicles that would potentially never had access to it in the past. But there's going to be tons of them. But if you look back at what is going on in the vehicles that are coming back that off lease, there's a lot of vehicles that are like sedans or compact cars that are coming back in that were hot a couple of years ago. But what's hot today is not these vehicles. So we're seeing that there's tons of them in the market. There's over excess of supply in the market. But the challenge, but what's happening as well is because of all this is that for the past 5 years, we've been experiencing a compression in our margins. What I mean by that is that NADA published a study that basically dealers are not making as much gross per vehicle as they used to in the past. And if you look through at all the publications and if you look through at all the dealer groups that are publicly traded and that are publishing their numbers, we're seeing that they're not making as much gross as they used to. And this is a graph that kind of shows you the trend for the past 10 years or 15 years, 10 years of these publicly traded groups and how much gross they've been making per unit. And you can see definitely that 20% compression that NADA published is in reality happening. So we used to make a pretty decent margin on these vehicles, over north of $2,000 per unit. Now we're lucky to make $1,600, $1,700 per unit. So margin compression is a reality, and unfortunately, it's not going to loosen up anytime soon, especially with the increase of supply that's coming back into the market and seeing how residuals are getting impacted as well as wholesale values are getting impacted. So what I'm trying to say is that what we used to do in the past is, and based on current market conditions, is forcing us to come up with a new way. We need a better way to truly find those vehicles that are going to make us money, because we can't afford to make those mistakes anymore. Because if we're making those mistakes, that means we're losing money. And if we're making those mistakes, that means somebody else is being smarter about the way to approach the market and are just basically doing something that we're not. What I'm saying is that we are all capable of doing that. And that new process, what I'm calling it, is a profit-focused perspective. And what does that mean? What does a profit-focused perspective mean? And what I'm saying is that a profit-focused perspective means we take the old way and we shift it. And what I mean by that is that we don't look at the vehicle itself first. We look at the profit first. We're putting money first. We're saying, is there gross potential in this vehicle? And then that's how I'm going to start looking at these vehicles in the market today. I'm looking at the cars that have money in it for me, or potentially I can make money on, and that's going to be my number one priority. And in order to be able to look at objectively at every single vehicle in the market, I need to know what every vehicle in the market is or available at that point in time. So I really need to see every single vehicle at every single auction in the United States. Because what I'm trying to say is that geography is not an issue anymore, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I'm saying to be profit focused, I need to look at every single car. And that's going to really help me at the end of the day minimize the time that I'm spending on research, minimize the time that I'm spending on evaluation of the vehicle, looking at condition reports, pictures, and so forth. And I'm really focusing on buying more vehicles that make sense for myself or for my business. And I'm not reverting back to plan B or plan C. And I'm able to really execute on so much more. So how does that work? So if we look at profit first, what do we mean by that? So as I mentioned earlier, we really need to look at every single vehicle with a number on it. So we need to put a virtual appraisal on every single vehicle out there. And I'm putting it based on profit. I'm really looking at retail-focused decisions, basically saying, how much can I sell this vehicle for in the open market? And then back into total cost of ownership, including not only the cost of the vehicle, but how much money is it going to cost me to recondition? How much money is it going to cost me to bring the vehicle back to my lot? All these things that are going to come into play to be able to result in a profit vehicle. And I'm also coming in on a bid basis. So now that I know how much I'm going to sell this vehicle, I'm taking all the costs that it's going to cost me to make this vehicle retail ready. I'm putting all my overhead into it. And then I'm backing into how much can I truly afford to pay for this vehicle. And that number becomes sort of a guide for myself. So when I go into the auction and I'm bidding on these vehicles, I already have a number in mind of what I need to go into this vehicle. And then that number could be based on book value or could be based on maybe higher than book value, because that book value is now a data point in my evaluation. It's not necessarily the true guide because I'm focused on profit. And if I am able to make the desired profit on this vehicle, but I'm going to go a little higher than book, then it doesn't really matter if I go a couple $100 higher than book value tells me I should be, knowing that I'm going in and I'm going to get the profit that I desire. So the most important thing is that I am making bids with eyes wide open. I know exactly what I'm getting into before I even buy the vehicle, before I even raise my hand or do whatever I need to do to be able to say, I need to get this vehicle or I'm going to bid on this vehicle. And it also helps me taking the emotion out of it. And what I mean by emotion is that if somebody else is bidding for this vehicle and they're potentially paying a little higher than I want to, then I can step away from that vehicle without getting carried away, because I know that there's no money in it for me after a certain point. So I can say, you know what? If I'm going to pay more for this vehicle, then I need to sacrifice. Then I need to be able to lower the cost somewhere else, because I know I could not make more than this, or I want to make more than this. So at least I'm making calculated decisions on every single vehicle that's out there in the market. And as I mentioned, in order to make that, I need to have access to every single wholesale vehicle in the market today. I need to see that there are more vehicles out there in more places. And one of the biggest reasons is that a lot of these folks that own these vehicles and own these fleets are trying to minimize their costs as well. So they're not really driving these vehicles and bringing them to my local market. They're potentially listing them in a centralized location, but they're able to say, because the internet now has changed the way we look at vehicles. And we can look at vehicles across the United States. Geography is not a limitation anymore. So for me to limit myself into looking at vehicles only in a certain specific area, I'm not able to truly maximize on the profit that I can, or maximize the profit that I can make on a vehicle that I could potentially buy from a different market and bring it into my market. And then really this myth of I can't really buy cars outside of my market because I don't know what they are. It's going to cost me too much money. But in the reality, that myth doesn't exist anymore, because as I mentioned earlier, I could potentially buy vehicles outside of my market, and it could be a couple 100 miles outside of my market, because maybe that market that I'm buying the vehicles out of is not as hot, or those consumers are not really looking for those vehicles in that market, but they are looking in mine. So I am able to buy those vehicles cheaper in that market, even after I put into it transportation costs, again, because I'm looking at it from a profit-focused perspective. I'm looking at the numbers first, and knowing that I can make $2,000 on this vehicle or $1,800 on this vehicle all in after transportation, then why wouldn't I do that? And then actually all of that, if I do all of that, that really brings it down to maximizing my buying time. And what I mean by that is that I am spending less time researching. Instead of spending the hours that I used to, I'm really spending more time buying vehicles. And people that have been adopted this plan and are using this plan are actually increased their buying by 40%. So they are buying more vehicles than ever before. As I mentioned earlier, in the old way, you have 20 vehicles on your list and you hope to come home with 2 or 3. Well, those people are increasing those. They're buying more of those 20 than they have ever before. And not only that, they're actually getting more money on those vehicles that they're buying because they know they're going in there with a profit-focused perspective. They know exactly how much to retail this vehicle. They have an idea of how much to really spend on reconditioning of this vehicle and transportation, that they're bringing it back in, and they've actually increased their profit by 25%. So that the margin compression is, they're actually using it to their benefit now because they're doing smarter retail buys. And what I mean by retail buys is that since they're buying the right vehicle and they're paying the right amount of money for it, then they're able to price it properly, which brings in the consumers to their dealerships, and they're buying more vehicles. So it all comes into play. It's not only a reduction in time and finding efficiency, it's really having residual values in that we're making more money, we're selling more cars, and not only that, we're actually getting the cars that we want and we know that we need. So in order to kind of help you frame it up a little bit, I'm using a couple examples from dealers that have actually adopted this process. And we're going to start off with Tony. So Tony is your regular independent dealer that used to be the 5-step auction guy. He would stay local within his market. He wouldn't go outside of his local area, and usually, stocked about 50 cars and would hope to sell about 20 to 25 of those vehicles. But now he's adopted the new way, and he's actually able to expand his horizon of buying vehicles. He's actually going out and buying cars out in Phoenix and Nevada, which is way outside of his market, and able to bring those cars in because in those markets, those cars are the ones that are selling in Minnesota are not selling in those markets. So he's able to buy them cheaper or under book value from his market. And even after he brings them into Minnesota, he's still making more money per vehicle. The craziest part about the story is that Tony would spend about 30 hours a week trying to prepare for auction, doing running the printing down or downloading the run lists, trying to do valuations on these vehicles, trying to prepare a list of these vehicles that he wants to go get, and doing all that process that I mentioned earlier. But by adopting this new profit-focused methodology, he's actually able to cut down the 30 hours into 2.5 to 3 hours a week only of research, because he's only filtering out all the vehicles that don't make any sense. He's only looking at profit-focused vehicles, and he's able to go down and then vet those out. So he's able to cut his time dramatically. And all of that is actually enabling him to not only become, buying more vehicles, going back to market with those vehicles. He's saving 90% of time, which is valuable to him because he is able to sell more vehicles. And now instead of that, he's stocking 50 cars and he's selling 40 cars a month. So he's able to sell a lot more vehicles because he's stocking the right vehicles, he's he's pricing to market, and he's still preserving his profit at the end of the day. And when I talked to him, he said the night before auction, he would spend 3 hours just the night before just trying to get ready, trying to put his notes together, put the lanes and everything together that he needed to. He cut that into 30 minutes on the day of the auction. It's pretty phenomenal. On the other side, we take Simon. Simon is a franchise dealer out of Louisville, and he had a luxury Lexus dealership. But what Tony did is he would just like Tony. I apologize. Simon would spend a lot of time in putting energy and effort into getting ready for auction. He told me that he would come home after dinner, and after having dinner with his wife, he would give her a kiss goodnight and then go back and start working on researching and spending all these hours trying to get prepared for auction. Then he would go to the auction the next day, and he'd get upset because the cars that he wanted he's not getting, and he's upset because he spent all this time and energy trying to prepare for auction, and when he comes down to it, in reality, he's not able to get the vehicles that he wanted, and he did it all by himself, and he's not able to truly. He's spending all this time and energy trying to buy similar vehicles, and he was actually only stocking luxury vehicles because most of the people came to his dealership were looking for a luxury brand. But when enable this new profit-focused approach and and using technology has really enabled him to really focus in on the right cars. He's buying mostly online now. He doesn't even go to auction anymore, very rarely unless he has to. But the most important part of it is that he's been able to diversify. So instead of only stocking luxury vehicles just that match his dealership, he's actually have a variety of vehicles now outside of his brand, and he's able to attract all kinds of different consumers into his lots. So he's actually now selling more vehicles than ever before. So now he's still getting the same kind of trades that are coming in from his regular customers, but he's also diversified beyond the Lexus brand, and he's getting more vehicles, and that's why he's increasing his sell through. By selling more cars, he's actually making 40% more profit in those vehicles because he's stocking vehicles that actually have a lot of money on them from a profit perspective, and he's able to attract them to his dealership. So not only is he selling more cars, he's making more money, and he's saving more time. And now he was able to kind of replicate his DNA, his buyer DNA, and feels confident in his new process that he actually brought in one of his lot guys in and made him his buyer, and basically gave him the criteria and the path of what to do. And he taught him very simply what he needs to go through, and now that person goes and buys cars for him. So Simon is able to spend more time selling more vehicles, doing the things that he enjoys around the dealership, and actually spending a little bit more time with family as well. So it's what's happening in dealerships like Tony and Simon is that technology is taking an impact in how they process and how they have changed their methodology. And then what they're saying is that they're allowing technology to enable them to become better and more effective at what they do. So we're not saying technology is taking over everything they do. It's enhancing their process. It's making them a little bit more efficient and effective and being able to focus in on something that's really, really important, and that's how making money. Just like we're seeing in our consumer world, just like we're seeing in anything outside of the world, how technology is taking over. And I like to use Amazon as an example. It started off as a place to truly sell cheap books and as an alternative to going to a library or going to a bookstore. But what happened is that they've evolved to become a single platform that has every single product that we ever thought of. And all of that was driven by technology and the fact that we've become reliant on using our smartphones, on using our tablets, on using the tools that are out there to help us become better consumers of other products. But the same thing is happening in the automotive world. That we're starting to become data driven, and we're becoming more disciplined and really taking the emotion out of it and really focusing on the money first. And we're looking at profit and profitability and market demand and supply and putting those as our leading indicators rather than saying what's available in the market today or what can I get. And the most important thing, I think that's the most valuable thing for us as entrepreneurs, is that we're using that technology to find efficiency in how we are buying vehicles. So we're cutting down on research time and looking for the vehicles and spending more time actually buying those vehicles and selling those vehicles. And basically we are generating more funds and more profit at the end of the day. What I'm saying is that we're changing our DNA or our buying DNA to be focused on what we want versus what we need. And what I mean by that is that you'll be able to, as a specific dealer, individually, your business plan or your way you approach the market is completely different from somebody else because your structure or the way you think of the market is not the same as everybody else. And that's what all makes us unique, and that's what makes us have different characteristics than somebody else. But we're able to harness those characteristics and that buyer DNA and enable technology to make that more efficient. So now we're able, based on our preferences, based on our desires, we're able to highlight and bring to the forefront the vehicles that make sense for our perspective. And we're able to, more than ever, to truly focus in on the money. So what I'm trying to say is that I think there's a shift in the market today, and there has to be a shift in the market today, is that when we used to focus more on the vehicles, and now we're focusing more on how much money we're making and how much money we're making on those specific vehicles. So with this, I would thank you very much for listening in, and I'll hand it back for the question and answer section.
Wonderful presentation, Maj. And if you have questions for Maj Sabores, who's the Director of Wholesale Business Development at vAuto, please use the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And just a quick reminder that we are recording today's session, so be able to review the great information and strategy that Maj has shared for yourself, or to share it with other colleagues at your dealership. And to get our question and answer session started, Maj, near the end of your presentation, you mentioned Amazon. Certainly, it's one of the most proliferated companies out there in all of the consumer space. I think all of us have a time or two received a package with the Prime shipping tape wrapped on the box. That Prime concept that Amazon leverages, what's your assessment of whether that concept eventually could make its way into the wholesale vehicle space?
So that's great. That's a great question, and I know I teased it and talked about it, but I do see, and I do think that we are moving more and more towards the Prime-esque concept. I'm not saying that we're going to have a car purchased at auction and ready for retail in 2 days. But what I mean by that is that we are using technology evolving to become a more recommendation basis. So based on our past history, based on our profile, based on our business plan, that we are seeing more a recommendation engine to say dealers like us in this market are buying vehicles like this and are making money based on those vehicles. So I do think we are moving towards that every single day, and technology is enabling us to do that. And I also believe that we are going to have the ability to have vehicles retail ready. For example, I'm saying I need 5 vehicles. I know which vehicles I need. I need those vehicles done to the specific standard of retail that I specify, or a certain amount of quality based on condition of the vehicle, and those vehicles will start showing up or become available for me to purchase whenever I'm ready for it. So yes, 100%, we're evolving to that. I'm not saying we're going to have drones dropping off cars at our lots, but we're moving a lot closer to that, to having that full spectrum of services, even in the vehicle world.
I'd say to have a drone deliver a vehicle to a lot, that would really be something to see. No doubt about it. Our special guest expert for our webinar today is Maj Sabores, who's the Director of Wholesale Business Development at vAuto. And our session today, again, is a new auction perspective. It's all about the money, not about the cars. And several dealers have kind of asked a similar question, Maj, phrasing it in different ways. You focus much of your presentation on the importance of profits and making sure that the money element is first and foremost there. But how important is it to still keep in mind getting those correct cars in the inventory that will fit the formula? How do used car managers and buyers make sure that they balance all of the great profit concepts you shared but still finding the vehicles that will turn?
Right. So I think that's the whole thing that I'm trying to explain in this webinar, is that it's a paradigm shift, that instead of focusing on the physical aspect of the vehicle, that we're 100% focused on the money. So the aspect of the vehicle itself becomes secondary. It's not that the car itself is not important. What I'm saying is that my time is important. My value, the way I want to approach the market is a lot more important. So you always need to have the right vehicle in mind. But I think the forefront needs to come in is there money in this vehicle? And then the next phase would be, is this the right color of the vehicle? Is this the right condition of the vehicle? Does this have the right mileage? And really, combination of that will give you a retail winner, because it's with the wholesale vehicles. Now it's a whole new segment of vehicles that are truly focused on that we want to focus on the vehicles that we can potentially have profit in, because we just can't afford to make mistakes anymore, because somebody else is going to be able to grab that vehicle and make the money on it while we're so focused on the right color and mileage combination, right? I think if we continue to focus on the money first, we're always going to end up as winners, and we're going to end up more successful. And then the other part of it is making sure that we have, the condition of the vehicle and so forth.
The voice you're hearing, that's Maj Sabores, our special guest for our webinar today from vAuto, and a great dealer anecdote that you shared during your presentation, especially about the operator from Minnesota, as you mentioned, acquiring inventory from as far away as Nevada and Arizona to stock his lots up in Minnesota. Without perhaps maybe going to that length, a dealer questions come in, again, kind of a summation of some questions that have arrived. That how can a dealer start out by using the strategy you described by first looking within that local market? How would you suggest that? Can the strategy work by looking local first, and then how long perhaps before stretching out that radius of search to find that inventory?
So Nick, again, that's another good question. And in reality, it all depends on the actual dealer and the business and the way they approach the game. So it's really, there's no perfect answer. But it is true that more dealers are acquiring cars more and more online and outside of their radius, because now it's becoming, the transparency that I mentioned earlier that the consumers are able to see is happening the same thing in the wholesale market. And there's a lot of ways to be able to protect ourselves today with different products out there that enable us to buy vehicles outside of our market and have some sort of comfort level and confidence that we're doing the right thing. But they are finding these outlets or these other auctions that are offering them lower pricing, as I mentioned. And so they're able to have some sort of a balance to say, I can go and have fun and be a little bit risky outside of my market, because I'm able to get a lot more cheaper vehicles outside of those markets, even after all the transportation. And now even these other companies are able to floor plan a lot of these costs that I don't even have to come up out of pocket for these costs. So again, it's offering me an efficiency and in execution of getting the right vehicle for the lower price, getting it safer to my region, and be able to protect myself. So I don't think you should always go online, or you should all go in lane. I think there has to be some sort of a combination, and it's all based on how comfortable that dealer is with that process. And you can start with one or two, and then you can start building and going further there. But it has to be some sort of a balance for sure.
Very good. Again, our experts during our webinar today is Maj Sabores, the Director of Wholesale Business Development at vAuto. And if you have a question for Maj, please use the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And again, sharing the dealer anecdotes that you referenced during your presentation, the gentleman from the Lexus store in Louisville that predominantly operates his buying online. Again, you kind of touched on it already, but how do you what's been your experience? How much of a shift has there been of operators who used to go in lane to the physical auction often and now have switched over to the online space? Just again, maybe some other anecdotes that you could share about successful dealers who've made the transition in adoption of online purchasing.
Definitely. I mean, I have lots of examples, Nick, because I mean, like I said, one of the greatest things that I do is really talking to dealers and understanding how they're embracing technology. So I can go on and on about different ways and different methodologies that these dealers have adopted. But the one common theme that every single person I've talked to has changed a little bit. So some of them that never really focused on buying cars at all online are now, as I mentioned, are dabbling into it, are trying it out, and being cautious about it, of course. Some of them are saying, they're going all out and saying, I'm switching to 100% online. But again, I'm not saying that that's right for everybody. But I'm saying that since a lot of these companies or OEMs, these lessors, and all these folks, sellers that have these vehicles, are saying it's not worth it to me to ship a car to Minnesota to sell in Minnesota when I can just list it online where I am. And so for the folks that are only looking within a regional perspective are missing out on a lot of other inventory that they probably didn't even know existed. And what I'm saying is that when we look at vehicles with a dollar sign next to each vehicle, we don't really look at year, make, model anymore. We're looking, does this category of vehicles have any money in it? Are these consumers, or can my market bear this sort of a category, this sort of segment of vehicles? And then once I decide that, I can go out there and find those vehicles. And I think that's what the shift needs to be. And that's what dealers that are adopting and changing their thinking are looking at the market today. So they're not looking at black or green or white or red SUVs or whatever it is. They're looking at different market segments and saying, is there money in this segment? How much money can I go get? And which market, which regional area is the most profitable or the most economic for me to go get those vehicles today? Because market shifts everywhere. And I'm not saying just because you buy cars for Simon that buys cars out of Phoenix and Nevada, I'm not saying that always going to be the right market for him, but at least he's looking outside of Minnesota. He's looking outside of his own focus, and because other dealers are only focused on that, so he's not going in the lanes and trying to compete with them on the same vehicles. So that's why he's able to buy them cheaper, because they're all going to that one pool and they're all fighting amongst each other. So he's going to an untapped market completely and able to pick these cars up a lot cheaper. So that's the kind of thinking and that's the kind of methodology that is being adopted by these dealers in saying, if I expand out of my market, I'm minimizing the competition for that specific segment and I'm potentially able to buy it cheaper. And that's how I'm making more money on that vehicle.
And to follow up on that, Maj, another question that's come in. It sounds like there are some dealers who perhaps buy 50% of their cars online, or maybe even close to 100% of their cars online. It would presume that it kind of runs the table of how much dealers use those online channels to find inventory.
That's exactly correct, and that's why I responded earlier. There's no magic formula. There's no magic mix that everybody should adopt. It's all based on each dealer and each business is unique in its own. So each dealer needs to evaluate what works best for them, and that's the way they should approach the market. And then adjust accordingly, either more or less, based on their success. And that's what I'm saying. So not only are we looking at purchasing cars properly, you need to look at how you sell them and how you operate. So numbers need to be the focus of every single thing that we do, no matter what.
Closing moments here of our webinar with Maj Sabores, who's the Director of Wholesale Business Development at vAuto. And if more questions come to mind, his contact information is there on the screen to reach out to him directly with perhaps some just looking for feedback of how you could pivot your inventory acquisition strategy. And Maj, perhaps is a way to close our session today. Some of the operators who've joined us might be thinking that, well, gosh, my sale day is in 2 days. How quickly can I change my strategy to integrate some of the recommendations that you have shared? How would you assess how quickly a dealership can implement these changes, and how long should they put them in place to have a good kind of evaluation data set to see how it might be benefiting them?
That's a good question, Nick. And I wish I'm not going to tell you it's going to take 2 days or it's going to take 3 weeks. It's all based on how open-minded the dealer is and how open-minded they are to accepting change. So I think I've seen it as fast as a week, but as slow as 3 months, to be honest with you. And it's all based on how sold we are on the concept and the idea. And if we really are 100% sold on the idea, then we're going to do everything in our power to implement. And not only we need to sell ourselves, we need to sell our teammates and our folks that work with us to make sure that they adopt the technology or the new methodology. So I do think that it is something that you need to go in there with an open heart and an open mind, but also make sure that you have buy-in from the people that are going to be using it or working with you on it, because you can't do it alone, as we know, through anything that we do in our world. So having buy-in, having the right dedication and discipline to say, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to go into it with full open mind and open heart, then you can be very, very successful. And it could be, like I said, a week or it could be months. But either way, I think you just need to be diligent about the process and make sure you're going into it with full buy-in and knowing that there's no way out, or you cannot go back to the old way.
Perfect way to leave it there, Maj, who's Maj Sabores, the Director of Wholesale Business Development at vAuto. A lot of great information and recommendations. Maj, thank you so much for sharing it with those who have joined us.
Thank you, everybody, for joining in, and I wish you all the best.
Well, thank you so much for joining us as a part of this webinar. Again, please watch your inbox for a link to the recording so you could review and share with others at your store. So until we connect again next time, I'm Nick Zulovich on behalf of Cherokee Media Group. Thank you so much for joining us.